IWF, we're here today with Leisha John, who's a relatively new member. So Leisha, tell us about yourself, your background, and how you came to Miami.
Sure. Thanks, Melanie. Well, my professional background is that I started as a CPA. I knew since I was 8 years old I would be a CPA. So I ended up being a lifer at Ernst & Young, EY. And I started out as a tax person serving clients for many years. And eventually I moved to India, where I headed up our global shared services center in Bangalore. And then after that overseas assignment, I shifted back to the US. And that's when I retooled myself into the area of climate change and ESG. And in that role, I was basically EY's Chief Sustainability Officer, and I was responsible for managing EY's environmental impact and carbon footprint. So
Wow.
that's my professional background.
And where were you doing that job for E&Y?
Well, with E&Y for like the last 20 years, you could pretty much live anywhere. So I was mostly in New York and DC, but then eventually I made it to Miami. I actually met my husband on an airplane. He sat next to me and he was a native of Miami. And at that point, I was living in New York, working in DC. He was living in Miami, but working in DC. And we, eventually I just moved to Miami because the weather was better and the rent was cheaper. And we got married, and then we moved off to India, and we've been together ever since and traveling the planet.
Great. Well, tell us what you're doing now, because you're no longer at E&Y, correct?
Correct. So as of just a year and a half ago, I pivoted from EY, and I'm now working in the not-for-profit world. So I am the chairman of an organization called Earthwatch. And the mission of our organization is to engage citizens in science to help conserve our planet. So we're a global organization. We're based out of Massachusetts. But basically what we do is we provide transformational expeditions for individuals, corporates, teens, students, so people can go out in the field for 8 to 10 days, working under the direction of a scientist and collecting data that has to do with a climate change issue or something around conservation. And then what we do is
example. Give us an example.
Sure. So one of my favorite expeditions actually was a conservation program down in South Africa. My husband and I went for 10 days, and we were studying how stressed out rhinos are becoming, because now they're starting to trim their horns, because each horn has about $300,000 of value, right? And instead of the poachers coming in and hacking off the faces of rhinos, we can conserve rhinos so that they don't become extinct by trimming their horns. And so we were out in the fields just seeing how closely they were huddling with their babies and if they were still foraging in a normal way, and checking the cortisol levels, which is the stress hormone, just to see how they're being impacted by that change. So that was a good one. I worked on several. Orcas in Iceland, pollinators in India. Recently got back from Peru, where we were tracking the pink river dolphins, which are being impacted by climate change.
Wow. Well, it sounds like your engagement with the community is also your current profession. But are there other ways that you engage with the community here in Miami other than Earthwatch?
Yes, in fact, I've been a member of Toastmasters for about 20 years. I always tell people I make my best friends at Toastmasters. So I've been part of the Miracle Mile Coral Gables chapter for a couple of decades. So I'm very active with that. And I'm also pretty active with the Aspen Institute, which runs events both in Colorado as well as in South Florida. So I try to engage around anything to do with climate change or ESG.
And you're also engaged with IWF, and
Yes.
I know that you're the part of your time in Colorado, so hopefully you'll be working with them there. Tell us what you like best about IWF.
Well, so far I haven't attended too many things. I've been on a couple webinars, which have been very informative, In fact, I was supposed to do the one on climate change, but then I was stuck in Italy with COVID, so I couldn't do it. So I've learned a couple of things from the webinars, and mostly I've been attending the dine arounds just to get to know some of the other women. And I went to one today. It's been very nice, very welcoming group.
Well, tell us, after all your time at E&Y and Earthwatch, what advice would you give your younger self?
If I had to do it all over again, I would spend more time cultivating strategic relationships as opposed to, quality versus quantity. And I would really be more deliberate about what relationships I made professionally.
That's good advice. I've been hearing a lot of different good advice, but that's the first time I heard about strategic relationships. Tell us what you mean by that.
Well, so I'm actually just started a book called Relationship Economics, and it was recommended to me by someone I met at a party. And I told her a little bit about the not-for-profit work that I'm doing and how I need to, engage more and cultivate relationships around major donors. And she suggested this book, and it's really more about, how it's almost like building a strong friendship, which I'm very good at with, just a small circle of very wonderful friends. But how do you build those types of deep and long-lasting, useful relationships in business?
Great.
I'd recommend it.
Good. Well, hopefully you'll find some more in IWF. Tell me a fact, or tell all of us a fact about you we could not find on the internet.
Well, I try to keep two things secret. One is I'm a pretty good palm reader, and I don't tell people because I don't want to be reading palms all night long at a party. And I'm also a certified funeral director, which surprises a lot of people.
And how did that happen?
Well, that's a long story, but it was just an interest I've had my whole life. My mother worked in that business, and so I had exposure to it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
What book or podcast are you recommending now?
One of the best books I ever read last summer was called The Ministry for the Future. And almost every book I read is about climate change, I have to say. But this book is about the future and how things will likely roll out in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And what I loved about it is it's very much has a global perspective. And I listened to the audiobook. Definitely, if you're going to read the book, listen to the audiobook, because they involve about 17 different characters, with accents from, India to Scotland to Peru. So it's an excellent read and really opens your mind as to the solutions to climate change and how globally the various governments have to work together to solve the crisis.
Great. Wrote it down. Finally, last fun question. If you were in charge of the playlist, what song would play next?
Well, I'm in love with Prince, so it would have to be anything that Prince either wrote or performed.
Okay.
Or hopefully both.
Great. Well, it was great spending time with you. See you soon.
Thanks, Melanie. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.